Alrighty, so thank you so much for coming to our session. This is Lessons in Spark UX, Prototype, User Test, and Iterate. If you're looking for the LAN party, it might be in here if you're not paying attention, but it's not here. This is Lessons in Spark UX. Just to get started here, just a brief outline of what we're going to talk about. We'd like to start off with a little bit of a description of who Spark is as a team. I know that many of you may have seen Spark sort of in the Drupal sphere without really seeing the faces behind it. We're going to talk a little bit about the vision of Spark and what Spark is meant to encompass. We're going to talk about our design and UX processes, as well as feature focus, design and testing. We'll talk about some key takeaways from our approach in Spark, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can get involved. Just as a disclaimer to preface the session, this is going to be a conversation about our processes and about the testing and prototyping, not about the features themselves. So we will not be talking about sort of what Spark is, what the vision of Spark is missing, or things of that nature. We'll be talking solely about our project process and things of that nature. My name is Preston So. I am a prototype developer at Acquia. I am also the prototype lead for Spark. I co-founded the Southern Colorado user group in Colorado, and I'm actually a part-time employee at Acquia. I'm a full-time college student right now, so not quite the full picture there, but.
I just wanted to say that that photo looks like he's 12. I kept telling him that he should change his photo. He didn't want to do that. Anyway, my name is Dharmesh Mistry. I'm a UX researcher at Acquia. I'm also heavily involved in the Drupal UX for core. Very interested and excited for Drupal 8. My other can't speak English. The other things that I'm involved in is User Experience Professional Association in Boston. I'm a board of director there, and I've co-organized other conferences like Boston Design Jam, Design for Drupal last year, and also the UX UI Summit at Bad Camp. I'm really passionate about open source and user experience design, and that's what I do. I went to Bentley University to get my master's in user experience research, and my other hobbies include eating desserts and taking photographs.
So how many people here have already tried out Spark? How many people have used Spark and looked at it a little bit, downloaded it? All right, so we got a lot of people who are new to Spark. What you might not know about Spark is that we have a very large team of people who are working behind the scenes to make Spark possible. And as you can see up here, we have a pretty large team. I think a few of them are here in the audience. And we have a really great team, starting with, excuse me. We have Kevin O'Leary here in the audience, who is our design lead. Put your hand up. And as well as some pretty familiar faces in the Drupal sphere here as well. So what is Spark's vision? Last year at DrupalCon Denver, during his State of Drupal presentation, Dries actually mentioned the potential for Spark to become sort of the press flow of content authoring in Drupal. It's meant to improve the experience all across the board in Drupal for content authors and site builders as well. So what are some of the goals that we're hoping to achieve with Spark? Well, the first thing is that, as always, not all goals can be met. So we put together a North Star vision, which is sort of our guiding light, but not necessarily sort of the ultimate end result, because obviously there are a lot of things that are in flux and change throughout. So what is part of this North Star vision? We have inline editing, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. We have a drag and drop content layout tool, and we have enhanced content creation all across the board. Every one of our edit pages and so on and so forth, those things have all been improved very, very drastically. We also hope to include some useful dashboards for content creators, and the most important, I think, based on the theme of the State of Drupal last year, is mobile content authoring and responsive support for working within the administrative interface. So Spark actually began as a collection of contributed modules that were intended to be part of Drupal 7. And then eventually we shifted our focus over to enhancing existing features in core and adding these contributed modules into core for Drupal 8. And so again, that list does take into account what we hope to accomplish, but not necessarily what we will accomplish in the end. So what are some of the user experience goals of Spark? These are sort of the goals that we hoped to accomplish during our time with Spark. The first thing is to improve the user experience of all content creation. And that means that all interaction patterns, all workflows need to make sense to any lay user. We also wanted to simplify saving and versioning tasks, because that's often something that people have a hard time with at their very first introduction to Drupal, while still distinguishing the operations. And then we also wanted to include a toolbar and dashboard that force limited clicks. One of the biggest complaints about the way that the CMS is out of the box is that it's very difficult to access certain areas of the administration. And of course, full mobile UX support, including touch support and so on and so forth. In addition, just as important as user experience is the accessibility front, which is including basically a sort of fallback for all people who need extra resources. So that includes edit in place, needing to be fully accessible with full tabbing interaction, accessible UIs all across the board, and an oral interface actually, which was spoken about I think a few days ago, that sort of guides users through changes that have occurred on the page when they aren't 100% obvious.
So just talking a little bit about the traditional process and how we modified that process to fit our constraints and what we wanted to achieve. A traditional process goes like a waterfall way, where we identify a problem, then we design it, we prototype it, we test it, and we develop it. In a lot of these cases, what's going to also happen is that we are going to probably skip the prototype and test and just go from design to develop. But I think in a lot of these organizations now we are seeing, especially in mature organizations where they value user experience design, is that we go through the process of usability testing as well as a key point to validate your designs before you put it out in front of your audience. What is important, what happens in an ideal waterfall traditional model is that you're going to do an internal review at every step during this process, but also considering that we work with the Drupal community, we want to review that process through issue queues and understand that we are getting the community feedback, we are making sure that we are not missing anything, and also trying to collaborate with the community throughout the process. So the way we modify the process is kind of a difficult diagram to grasp, but the idea is it's a more of a cyclical process, and the process never ends. By that, what I mean is that we always identify a problem. So for example, when we start talking about content creation, over the period of my time at Acquia, I've talked to a lot of enterprise customers, a lot of SMB customers, and understanding the pain that they have with content creation. Because site builders, they are a different audience. The one who are actually writing the content is a different audience. We need to make sure that if we want to move in the right market trend direction, we have to accommodate the need of those content creators. So we identify that that is the problem. Then we are going to sketch the problem. We are going to prototype the problem. We are going to test the problem and then develop it. And then it kind of goes throughout the process. What's interesting is that at any point during this cycle, it might be at sketch step or it might be at prototype or test, we'll come across as like, hey, this is not really working well. I think this is missing that, or it's not going back to the goals that we started with. So we again go back to the identifying the problem, try to sketch it again, try to go through this process again and again and again till we come to a point that we all agree that it's right. The same happens at testing. So when we are testing, sometimes we are testing for interaction patterns, sometimes we are testing for we do a lot of contextual inquiries to understand is that how is the mental model working with the prototype? Is it working in sync or it's going against the model? So we'll show you some examples of some things that we did well, some things that didn't go well. And of course, throughout this process, we are going to go through the internal review process and also the process of engaging with the community. The other dimension that is interesting in this part is the point of where we start with the design and where we want to go with the design. So as Preston mentioned earlier, the North Star is like the guiding light. That's where we want to be at. It's not necessarily the end goal of the process. And what is happening is that we kind of have to, I don't want to say the word compromise, but we have to settle for an actionable design. And that actionable design comes from a lot of constraints that we are bound with. That could be constraints from technical point of view, or the time limitations, or the code freeze deadlines, what we want to do if we want to include that in Drupal core. And this actionable design step is actually, it's not necessarily going towards North Star always. Sometimes what happens is that we are moving with the initial design, we come to an actionable design, we inch closer to the North Star design, we come across a hurdle, we have to go back, roll back a few steps, and then see that we have to make this balance to come to an actionable design. The two important things on this slide are the way we did our prototyping and usability testing is through InVision and high fidelity prototypes. By that, what I mean is that InVision is an app which sort of allows you to stitch together a few images, and then there are hotspots, so you can click through them, and then it provides sort of a pseudo experience of what that prototype would be. The pros and cons of each of these processes and prototypes, Preston will talk in a bit, but I'm also going to show you what is an InVision app prototype and how does that look like. The other prototype that we do is a high fidelity prototype. It's really, doing all the jazzy technical things that I don't really understand. But it provides a rich interaction, an interaction that is true when it's going to be developed. And both of these pieces, the two dimensions that I spoke about earlier, they all work in Agile, the way we do it at Acquia for Spark. And Agile, if you're familiar with it, it comes with its pros and cons. The pros is that it is a multiple iterative process. We are continuously iterating as we move on. One of the interesting things about Spark is that the designs change so rapidly. It's like if you miss a day, it's like, oh, whoa, what happened? Like, did this design change? Because we are going through that process of identifying problem at every step. So anyone in the design team or anyone involved in the Spark team can say, hey, there is a problem, let's stop it, let's go back to the process of identifying it, sketching it again. So that's one of the advantages of Agile, and it, of course, the bottleneck that it introduces is another problem with it. The good point of Agile is also that it enhances, for usability researchers like me, is that it enhances the flow of doing usability testing. The way we do usability testing for Spark has been evolves from running sessions, which would probably take 2 or 3 days, to running sessions in 4 hours and getting the results out so that we can iterate it faster. Community feedback, we always provide, I always provide my reports to D.O issue queues and tell that these were the issues that were found. You can always just do Spark, and then you'll see all the usability issues associated with that. I just want to talk a little bit more about the disadvantages in terms of the constrained team that we have. So he's a part-time employee at Acquia. I'm a centralized usability resource, so I don't get to spend all my time on Spark. And in that case, what happens is that since this process is moving so fast, it becomes really difficult to keep up with it. And when you have to make sure that the communication is optimum, it's always thoroughly documented in one way or the other to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And Preston's going to talk a little bit more about what it means to prototype in the InVision app and in the high-fidelity version of it.
So the two approaches that we take to prototyping are really quite contrastive. In InVision app, we have a set of pros and cons that really are good for a quick turnaround. If we want to produce a prototype that's going to be testable within a day, within a few hours, InVision is really the most optimal choice because, obviously, because I'm a part-timer, it's difficult for me to, really code something out very, very quickly that can be tested. The good thing about InVision is that you can actually directly put in and insert the mockups that have been produced. So any of the things that were produced in the design are replicated pretty much exactly in an InVision prototype. An additional feature of InVision, which is one that we've used to quite a great extent, is in prototype commenting, where you can actually go in and click on an area which produces a comment that actually focuses in on that singular point. Unfortunately, the biggest problem with InVision and the biggest weakness that we've had to face is that there is no possibility of complex interactions. We really can't do anything such as focusing, hovering, anything of that nature, any sort of dragging and dropping. All of those things really cannot take place in InVision because it is sort of an image-based prototyping tool. Additionally, the prototypes are not based on code, which means that this adds an additional layer of sort of setback, of latency to the process, in which we have a prototype, but none of that prototype is reflected in code, which means that we still have to go through the coding process in order to produce anything. One final weakness of InVision that we have found is that there is a great deal of confusion that we've encountered with testing. Because of the simplicity of the interface and because of how sort of straightforward the workflow is in the InVision process, it doesn't really sort of work out to display a vast array of complexity that really is sort of the key element of Spark. On the other hand, high fidelity prototyping, which is sort of my primary area of expertise, relies on these complex interactions. It relies on hover, it relies on active on focus and that nature and things of that nature to really display how these interactions are playing out, to display how the UI is going to eventually take shape. And once again, because of the fact that InVision is solely image-based, there is no code. And with high fidelity prototyping, what we can do is we can put together code that even, at its current state might even be ready for development. It might even be ready just to put straight into core. And we actually had one episode of that where, a little bit of the code that I had written was just pretty much word for word placed in the core. There's a full in-browser testing environment, which means that there's none of this sort of extra fluff around the page. There's no commenting. Basically, any time that you test something in Chrome, you want to have a very clean testing environment, a very pure testing environment that people are going to use as a sort of default tool, as opposed to something that displays hotspots as InVision does, or guides you through the process. Unfortunately, the method of prototyping that we've adopted does produce a slower turnaround. It's a lot easier to sort of drag and drop pictures into a grid as opposed to typing out hundreds of lines of code in one day. Another big problem is that because of the fact that we need to produce things very quickly and achieve a high velocity, sometimes the interactions really have to be sort of magic. We can't really have the full breadth of possibilities because of the fact that we are so time constrained. What that does mean is that something does work, but it honestly in the code it doesn't really work that same way. It's just sort of magic. It just sort of happens. The final weakness is that prototypes are not necessarily based on design mockups 100%. Sometimes there are limitations. Sometimes there are problems that need to be addressed immediately that sort of preclude the prototypes being 100% accurate to the mockups. And we address those pretty much after every step of the process.
Just one other thing I want to talk about, the other slide, is in terms of what it means to just like how do you, if you're a usability researcher, it's like when do you want to test something with InVision app, or when you want to do a high fidelity prototype, it always comes back to the question of what is that we are trying to accomplish with this prototype testing. And a lot of times, or rather, should I say, most of the times, I always go to the lead designer and tell it, what is the goal? And then we talk about it. Is the goal of it to just go through the workflow and verify and validate the workflow? Or is it also to understand the subtleties of every interaction that is necessary to complete the workflow and understanding of the user? So that's just one of the interesting things about using which points we want to use.
So one of the most important findings that we found sort of through vetting our process and the evolution of the process was that a sort of phenomenon known as designing in the browser was really sort of revolutionary for our process. One of the things that we discovered was that overly rigid sort of linear process really didn't work out the way that we had hoped. And traditional processes are sort of overly rigid because you take a product, you have an input, and you do something to it, and you pass it on as output, and there's no sort of collaborative process in that. There's very little opportunity to sort of come together and say, well, you know, this is the approach that we should take. You know, one of the best things, obviously, about traditional rigid, a very rigid approach is that, you know, you can pay very close attention to the details, and you know, oftentimes the design attributes are very easy to substitute when you iterate on a design. But you know, the issue with that is that there's somewhat of a slow turnaround. Prototyping is sort of even later in the process and placed even later in the process. And interactions, obviously, as we've mentioned, those things are very difficult to commit to a design and display in a design. So one of the things that we came up with was, you know, in my prototyping processes, as I was coding, there were oftentimes instances where we discovered an issue in the design or an issue that was technical that really needed a new design solution. And what that meant is that, you know, the designer and the prototyper really forge a partnership at this stage to fix any of these technical issues, if possible, in an in-browser context. So anything that is sort of faulty can be immediately rectified within the browser just with a few changes in the code. And these sorts of things are meant to be collaborative. It's meant to be part of this cyclical process that isn't necessarily devoted solely to iteration, but also to this sort of collaborative approach. And so what's really great about this is there's a very fast turnaround. Any changes that are made are immediately implemented. And any interactions that do change can be sort of, as a collaborative process, placed into the design as need be. Of course, the weaknesses are that, you know, there's a little bit less attention to detail. Sometimes the design that was initially finalized might not be followed 100%. And oftentimes, simple changes to attributes such as color or simple, you know, typographical changes might need to be a little bit more extensively done and might require a little more time. So as a result, our sort of new modified process entails at the prototyping stage, including a design in browsers part of it, which is sort of hand in hand with the prototyping stage.
So that was about the overall processes that we followed in order to make sure that we are where we are at, inching towards the right goal that we want to be aiming at. What we're going to do in the next part is that we are going to focus on a few features, focus design and test. By that, what I mean, we're going to talk about the problem space, the solution, the technical design constraints, and the UX issues that came along with it. As you will go through these slides, you will realize that some of these things have been implemented in Spark, some of these have not been implemented in Spark, and some of them have just been stalled for the moment for various reasons and constraints that we'll talk about. So one of the problem space that the biggest concerns what Spark tried to address is that users do not know the context of what they are editing. So previewing content or editing content has been a big pain point in Drupal for a very long time. And you don't see the content. What also happens is that the new user is going to, it takes too much effort and to really dig down to that specific content, make changes to that content, especially if it's like a small typo. Also, the content listing pages, I must say it's less than optimal right now in terms of experience. So those kind of things kind of exaggerate the problem area right now, what we have. Also, when you go on the content creation page for content editing, there is a lot of information there. For example, you have a lot of vertical tabs, and you have all these other fields, things that you may want, things you don't want. So thinking about this problem space, what we thought is that what we want to do is, in order to improve the content authoring experience, is introduce something like inline editing. I am going to attempt to show you inline editing if my cursor is going to help me with that. Okay. All right. And it's not, all right. So basically, it's not showing it properly, but this is an InVision app. That's what I was talking about. So it's a bunch of images that are stitched together with hotspots. And the way it works is that you cannot probably see it properly, but the way it works is that when you hit on edit or you do it on hover, these pencil marks show up, which are basically forming, giving you that, okay, this is editable. You go there, you make some change, you move on to the next one, and then it has the WYSIWYG. Let's take that out and then save it. And then it also allows you the option to go to the full edit page if you want to make more changes to that. So this is an InVision prototype, so this is what we tested.
That's high fidelity, though.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. My bad. I knew Kevin shouldn't be here.
The one that says,
Yep. Oh, that's the mobile WYSIWYG. All right. And this is what we have right now. Cannot see the edit. Oh. Anyway, if you go on to, if you install Spark, you should be able to see that where we are at right now.
there you go.
Oh. Yep, so if you go on edit, quick edit, and then you can make it 7.5, because I like white wine. Yes. All right. And where is it? Okay. So that was the inline editing that we were talking about. And during this process, what I think is also important to talk about what happens to save and publish, because over the period of time when doing research for Drupal Gardens, we found out that save and publish is really it's a very interesting problem that we face with save and publish, is because the experienced Drupal users understand what is save and publish. But what the new users are coming from different CMSs, they do not understand what is save. Does save publish? Does save not publish? So we also wanted to make sure that as we are going through this process of inline editing, we make sure that you are absolutely sure what you're doing. If you are editing that content and if you're hitting that save or that publish, what is that going to do? So that has been one big problem that we are trying to solve. And of course, that's still, we are working on the solution, but basically that's the agenda, that's the problem that we are looking to solve there.
So one of the other things that we decided to approach was sort of how do we let users know which areas of the site, which areas of the page are actually able to be edited. And one of the initial approaches that we took was sort of a 3-second stage setting transition where every single editable field was sort of highlighted with a blue border and then faded out. Now, you know, one of the biggest problems that we discovered with this, though, is that, you know, it's a very fleeting affordance. It doesn't really make much sense to sort of display it only one time and, you know, allow users to sort of figure out what's going on later on. So in this case, the edit onset prototype that I put together didn't really yield the best results because, you know, first of all, the affordances need to be persistent in the sense that users need to know exactly what fields can be edited. And also, the sort of accessible component, which is that, those sorts of transitions are very inaccessible and can't be viewed from that context.
So over the period of time, we've done a lot of iterative testing on inline editing, and I'm just going to go through the latest results that came from that study in April. One of the inline editing had received overwhelmingly positive response from the users, and you can read some of the codes which tells that how it is a delightful experience to do something like that, and that's something that they did not expect Drupal to do. However, there are some issues that we still need to work on. We need to still really identify and flush out the save versus publish. What happens is that, as I was talking about the three-step process from initial design to actionable design to a North Star design, is that when we started adding revisions to it, it became complicated as to what does that mean. Is it the revision going to save in terms of per field? Is it going to be collapsed together? Where am I going to go to find my revisions? How does that interact with save and publish? So it's a classic example of how you add another feature and then everything kind of, you have to make changes to it in order to accommodate that the experience is still very solid. So revision is still something that we want to flush out in the near future, but the bigger problem was save versus publish, and also that the transitions that we had were too subtle. I would say the transitions being too subtle is more of a minor usability problem, because that is something that you're going to learn over the period of time. It's more of a, oh, I get it now, what's happening with this. It's not really a roadblocker from completing the task, but it is just an enhancer to understand the interaction patterns of it. The other thing that we had was the unsaved changes. So in the prototype, what would happen is that if you make some changes to your content, it will give you a sign and say 2, 3, and people understood that these are the number of changes that I've made. But what happened with the prototype, that it could not tell you that what those changes were. So people are like, okay, that's great that you're telling me that I have made 3 changes, but it kind of does not really help me if you're not telling me what those changes are, because I have these 7 fields in my content type, and it's just not effective for my use case. So that was just about the inline editing. The other thing that we wanted to solve with Spark is the notion of the toolbar. The toolbar is the glue that connects everything together. It is besides the terminology problems that we have with Drupal, understanding the mental models with blocks and views, this is what it is actually going to bring everything together. And since 2011, I've done a lot of usability studies understanding the problems with the Drupal 7 toolbar, and the biggest problem with the toolbar is that it's too busy, it's too convoluted. Even a lot of experienced users, you will see that it's like, oh, is that in site building? Is that in configure? Where is what? You don't remember. And there are a lot of these options. You'll see that a lot of these people, what they do is that they just even don't bother going through the toolbar. They just want to put the URLs and move forward. So what we want to do with this approach, with this problem, is that we want to make sure that we are at least helping just a little bit more to the new user to make the learning curve easier. And of course, it's also unresponsive. So what we try doing it, I'm going to very quickly show you the toolbar. Oh, damn it. It's not my day. So this is the new toolbar that we kind of work together. The interesting thing about this toolbar is that it goes horizontal and vertical. It is what it's trying to do is that it's supposed to help the new user get into where they need to, but it's at the same time also telling the established user that we are not going to compromise on your efficiency if you have to use this toolbar. One of the things that I want to mention about the toolbar is I still think that we still need to work on the information architecture. What we have right now is very much similar IA as we have in Drupal 7, and we know that there are a lot of issues with the IA. So that's something that we want to figure out in the near future. Yep. When we did the usability testing on the toolbar, and what we did is a comparative usability study. By that, what I mean is that we show, let's say if there are 8 participants, then we show 4 participants the new toolbar, and then we show the current toolbar, and then we kind of flip the order so that there is no bias to the viewing order in which how people think. And we found that people had positive response to the toolbar. They thought it was clean, it had nice icons, it was visually appealing, but they had some trouble discovering a few things. So the drop-down arrow, which kind of eliminates page refresh, was not very clear. It was too small. They did not know that that would enhance the experience for an experienced user. They had problems discovering how to, oh, I did not know I could move the toolbar from horizontal to vertical, vertical to horizontal. So that was an icon problem that we needed to fix. The edit shortcut, people were not sure how to do that. They thought that it was a good feature in D7, and they thought that we kind of took it out, but we hadn't taken it out. So it was like, I did not know where that is. And of course, the legacy IA issues that I spoke about are still something that we need to work on.
So how many people here have experience with WYSIWYG in Drupal and all of the problems associated with it? Yeah, right. Lots and lots of issues with WYSIWYG in Drupal. Well, one of the approaches that we took, a little while ago, we actually decided to adopt CK Editor as the core WYSIWYG platform for Drupal. And part of the reason for that is not only to simplify the ridiculous complexity of WYSIWYG in Drupal, but also to cater to mobile users a little bit as well. They're doing a lot of good work over there on the team with approaches to mobile and approaches to non-desktop devices. The current problem with WYSIWYG for example, in 7 is that WYSIWYG really does not cater to mobile users' need and context. And if you're a mobile user and you're going into a page to make one change, let's say you want to boldface a word or you want to add a small link or something like that, that's very, very difficult to do on a mobile device, even though it should be something that really should be easy, especially with our new focus on mobile-oriented administration. There are too many small buttons. The affordances aren't there. You really just can't. For me, I have kind of big hands, and I really just can't touch those buttons sometimes. So the solution that we came up with was a mobile WYSIWYG solution that adopted CK Editor and had some embellishments on it to really improve the platform itself. Right now, this is quite in a state of flux. There's a lot of discussion going on about this right now. But if I just switch over, I can show you very quickly one of our prototypes here. And if I can resize this, there we go. And one thing that you'll notice here is that it's we've simplified the number of buttons. We simplified the number of buttons in the prototype, and we also made it so that whenever you scroll on a mobile device, the toolbar actually sticks with the content. So you don't have to, because one of the biggest problems with editing any sort of page on a mobile device is that you have to scroll all up and down to try to find the buttons again, and so on and so forth. So this actually makes the process a lot easier. So this prototype is currently not implemented, but it did sort of yield a lot of important considerations that have actually made their way into core. And this is sort of part of that overarching theme of, well, even though we haven't reached the North Star design for this process, we have reached a vision that can be sort of applicable to a variety of different environments. And so one of the biggest things that we wanted to make sure was that mobile affordances need to be there, but they also need to make sure that loading time is not extended as a result. I think Dharmesh will talk a little bit about some of the usability results that we found.
So I think for the last few use cases, I was telling all good things about how everything tested positively. So now I'm going to say something that didn't test positively. One of the research that we did with usability testing with the mobile WYSIWYG is kind of a very complex problem that we are trying to solve here, is understanding there are three big problems with it. One is the user behavior, the iOS behavior, and the prototype behavior. So the user behavior was they were very rigid about making changes. They wanted to not edit changes to their content on the phone. And of course, we need to do more research and more contextual inquiries with a bigger sample size to see how that affects what we are trying to achieve. The other problem was the iOS behavior. So what happens is that iOS has its own behavior functionalities like select and copy, and when we're trying to use it with the WYSIWYG, it just kind of blocks and overlay kind of thing, and then it becomes very difficult to make those changes. So that was another problem that kind of resulted in this negative experience. And of course, there were some prototype changes that we had to make because it's a high fidelity, but it's still not there. So people sometimes get confused as what is a bug and what is actually a problem with the prototype. So and also because there was some design, I would say time constraints and understanding that what we want to achieve and where we want to go, we did not take this design to the next level, at least for now. So ultimately, the results from that weren't 100% positive, but they did actually yield a very good aspect of sort of icons in general that we have incorporated to a great extent in Core, and that's icon fonts, which is a way to produce icons in a semantic, accessible way that doesn't require you to have a new image inserted in there. Basically, what it encompasses is a custom font is created with a bunch of SVGs of all of these icons, and they're put together into a sprite, and that's used as the font. So this code on the right side that you see here is code actually taken directly from the high fidelity prototype. It's not the sort of end all be all code, but it does sort of show you a little bit of how easily we can manipulate the icons, and basically any sort of character entity here can be replaced, and this is actually part of extended Unicode. We can actually take an icon and insert it as part of the font, and this actually is an approach that's been used by several other applications, but we've adopted it for the Toolbar in addition to our approach to WYSIWYG. So as you can see, just a little bit more code here. We take a custom @fontface rule, and we insert what we call Spark icons, which is sort of the overarching font that encompasses all of the icons that we've attached to Spark. And what happens in the CSS is that we use CSS content to actually insert the attribute back into the page flow and make it readable as content. As a result of that, we have a background image with no text, and it doesn't require anything above and beyond what's already sort of available. So another big aspect of the administrative interface that we wanted to address was the dashboard. And one of the biggest problems is that new users coming to Drupal really don't understand how the dashboard works. The dashboard in its current state is sort of this amorphous box area where you can insert different sort of columns which have filtered lists of content and what have you. But a new user is really going to want a more useful dashboard that is really geared toward their personal needs. And so our solution was a responsive dashboard, because as part of this mobile approach, we do want to allow mobile devices to easily access these
these dashboards as well. So what you see up on the screen behind me is on the left side you see sort of a desktop version of the dashboard that we initially created, and then the mobile version on the right side. As you can see, you've got 4 very simple icons that are very simple and very direct for content creators who can instantly access any sort of task that they might need to create without really knowing any of the jargon in Drupal. And as you can see, there are icons up there which were implemented using icon fonts once again. And so, you know, one of the really great things about icon fonts is that you can actually use CSS to change some of these attributes and, you know, apply text shadow, apply background, apply a variety of CSS to change how the icons actually look. And that's because they're being displayed as text and not as images. And so this was a very sort of important part of our prototyping process that yielded a very big result that was applicable to a variety of different aspects of Drupal. And we actually, you know, went ahead and adopted this sort of full on.
The last thing that we want to talk about is the problem space for need for responsive layout building. We thought that what we don't allow our users right now is what is happening with the current market trends. The ability to create these layouts and breakpoints for tablets, for mobiles, for desktops with different, whatever you want to do, you want to give that flexibility to the user, which we don't currently provide in a very simple GUI fashion. So the way we wanted to do this is through the breakpoint editor, and I'm going to very quickly show you just an image of what it does. And what it does is that you can add a breakpoint to it. You can also minimize and maximize the pixel sizes of it. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to rush through this, but one of the interesting things that we found from this process is that it is trying to do too many, from the user experience testing that we found, is that it's trying to do too many things at the same time. And it kind of confuses or it goes against the mental model of the user. So what happens is that when you actually create and add a breakpoint, you would expect that, let's say if I hit that add breakpoint here, I would expect that the new breakpoint would be between phone and tablet. But what it was doing it was creating a breakpoint between tablet and standard, which was against the mental model of the user. So we wanted to make sure that in the next version of the design, we fix that mental model design changes. The other also problem is that you had to move the add breakpoint to the standard or to phone in order to make changes to the min-max. So we want to make sure that we provide, how do I say it? It's like it's trying to do too many things at the same time, and especially because this is a new concept, the users took a while to really understand what was going on. So very quickly, we just want to go through some key highlights as to what all this means to us and how we think that this process can help the community at large. One of the key things that we've learned so far is that we have to work with what we've got. We are all trying to be perfectionists in our fields, and it's not always ideal to be perfectionist. You have to balance your resources, you have to balance your time constraints. So this is probably, it took me a while to really like, no, we don't want to do this, we need to get it better, we need to get it better, but it's like, no, we don't have time to do that.
And one other key highlight that we sort of found was that prototyping and iterating upon the design was very important from an early stage, and even actually our process as well, because oftentimes we had to sort of evolve our process to really yield the best results, and so trying to repeat, and repetition is still very, very useful, but sometimes you do need to move ahead, and as Dharmesh said, iterating constantly and trying to achieve a sort of paragon of perfection is not going to really work in a very time-constrained context. And so one of the approaches that really sort of functions well for this is the design in the browser. A collaborative process between the designer and prototyper yields really good results because it doesn't require the iteration that really delays the project, but it actually moves it ahead and brings the project to the code, to the coding stage, which is really key. Another very important takeaway is that sometimes you have to leave the Drupal context to make it better. And this is something that we came across time and time and time again, is that, first of all, trying to prototype in Drupal is one of the hardest things in the world. Trying to, implement some sort of a new feature, you might as well be developing on Drupal. And it's, with this sort of extensively modified functionality, for example, with the breakpoints editor, that was entirely high fidelity, that was entirely outside of Drupal because it simply had to be. There was no way to really easily do that within the Drupal context. And so, raw HTML and CSS is really advantageous for cleaner markup. It's much more easily changed. So one of the other problems is that, a big complaint about the aspect of design in Drupal is that it's very based on precedent. We have a lot of precedents that have been established since 4.7, since 5, since 5, that really have stuck in Drupal and haven't really left. And so what we really strove to do in this process is to exercise ourselves, is to extrapolate ourselves out of this paradigm, out of this paradigmatic approach that Drupal has already, these precedents. Because oftentimes in our current context, in a responsive context, in a mobile context, these paradigms really just break down entirely. And so, by taking away our sort of preconceived notions of what this ought to be because of the fact that it was this way in 5, it was this way in 6, we decided, well, we need to completely remove ourselves from the Drupal context and say, what is it that actually needs to remain? What is it that, how is the structure ideal, and how can we best manipulate it in that way?
And I think a few other key highlights, I think is something that we need to learn. I think there is some room for us to think about is that this is a really good model for, of course, it needs some changes over the period of time, but is for open source projects. I think we've done a fairly good job of engaging community at every step, and it will, getting their feedback, making sure that we are doing the right thing. And to the point is also that engaging the community is hugely beneficial. We have so many times that we haven't discovered issues that the community members have told us, like, oh, what about this use case? What about that use case? And that really helps us to make this thing better for everyone. I would want to say that there is still a lot of room for that. What we have right now, the habitat does not give you enough in terms of Drupal.org issue queues because it's more of a developer-focused workflow and not so much as a design issue-focused workflow. So that's something that we can probably talk about at some other point. But the last things that we want to talk about is how to get involved in the project.
So for those of you, I know that many of you have not tried out Spark, but I invite you to try out Spark. We invite you to look at some of these new features that we've tried to implement. And the best way to get involved in Spark is really to go through the issue queues and look at some of these, some of these really, really vivacious discussions going on about the future of Spark and the future of the way content editing will work in Drupal. So we invite you to go to the project page and look at some of the issues that are there. It's a very, very well curated queue that has sort of mountains of issues that are really useful. And we're hoping that sort of in the context of the problems that we've faced, we're hoping to find a little bit more improvement in the issues queues for design-related issues as opposed to development-related issues, because one of the biggest problems that we faced is that design-focused problems are not being addressed in a very very intuitive way in the issue queue because the issue queue is so code focused. So we'd like to thank all of you for coming to our session. We'd also like to thank all of the key contributors to Spark: Louis Nyman, Roy Scholten, Hoyan Summers, excuse me, and all the other people who have contributed countless hours to the issue queue, countless hours to making this project work the way that it has so far. We thank you so much for coming to our session. We invite you to evaluate our session, tell us how we did, and feel free to get in touch with us with any questions, and we'll also take questions right now as well. So thank you so much.
I was interested in what mobile use cases you had for Spark. Like, did you do personas and like specific people that were going to be editing on mobile? And is on the iPad or tablet, are you going to have the mobile experience because it's touch-based?
Yeah, so we actually tested both. We didn't have the time to fit it into our presentation, but we did test on the iPads and the iPhones. So when the persona that we were trying to aim was the content editor, the marketing person. And one of the things that we tried doing is to really fasten the turnaround times. We do a lot of in-house usability testing as well. So we would have someone from the marketing team who is like a project manager who needs to quickly edit content on acquia.com. It's like, how would you do it? Why would you do it? When would you do it? So we focused on that use case. I want to say that the experience on the iPad was more, it was significantly better than the iPhone one, but it's also, that's something that we really need to understand, and I'm not sure at this point in time, is that my personal problem is I'm not really 100% convinced that people do want to edit so much content on the mobile phone. On iPads, yes, but yeah.
And I work on a lot of international sites, and a lot of research I've done. There are a large amount of people doing work on their mobile phones in different countries. That just happens to be like what they have to access the website. So there is one use case there. And then I had another question about, did you modify CK editor? Like the JavaScript? No?
No, we just skinned it. I think this is off.
You just skinned it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Oh, can you disable the WYSIWYG? Can you just do plain text editing? Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi.
Test.
I'm not sure if you've seen yesterday's keynotes where Karen criticized the use of the WYSIWYG and inline editing. And I would just like to know what's your opinion about it, if you accept the criticism, and what can you do about it?
Sure. So I think everyone who's on the Spark team can contribute to this conversation. I think my personal viewpoint is that as a usability researcher, I love feedback. And I appreciate the feedback. And as I mentioned earlier in the session, that this session is more about the focus of the process, not about why we did what we did necessarily. And I think there is a lot of room for discussion as to what we can do to make this a better experience for the content editors. That being said, I'm not either convinced entirely as to the criticism that we've got, but I think I'm having a lot of hallway conversations with people, which kind of is helping me understand what we need to do to get this better and nail it down. Maybe we need to do something else. We don't know yet.
Can I talk to that a little?
Sure.
So these guys have just done some awesome work on the Spark project, and but I do want to comment and speak to a little bit of what Karen said yesterday. And I spoke about this in my own session in the community track a little while ago. And Wim and I went up and we spoke to Karen after her keynote, and we were really interested in hearing more because I think both of us and Preston and Dharmesh as well have really followed her work and been really excited about it. And I think we're really all on the same page in terms of giving the user an understanding of the different contexts that their content is going to appear in. And I think one of the things is that Karen wasn't really kind of clear on what we're really doing with in-place editing in Drupal, which is actually quite unique. Even going beyond what's in head right now, where you're editing individual fields, the contextual experience that we give the user in the latest version of in-place editing that we're working on actually first shows the user that they're editing a node, and then once they click inside the node, atomizes out all of the fields into individual containers. So you're actually illustrating to the user that they're creating content in a structured way. So we're showing the user the structured content of Drupal in a very clear and unambiguous way in in-place editing that no other content management system is really doing. The one thing that we do still have to work on, which she made a fair point about, is that we need to give the users a much better understanding of how the content that they're editing in the desktop experience is not exactly going to be the same in the mobile experience, and they don't want it to be the same in the mobile experience, by providing better affordances for divisions between teaser, full content, and things like that. So.
Yeah, and I think it's also the push and pull between innovation, user experience, design, and features, right? So we have to try to balance it out, everything in a very cohesive fashion, and it's always not easy.
Alrighty, I think we're out of time, but thank you so much for attending, and we'll stick around just for a few minutes if you have any personal questions. Thank you so much.